Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. I think more people will join along the way. Thanks, Evelyn, for starting the recording. So, welcome to the first thematic webinar of the working group around for defining the public organization public service data models. The agenda for today is to remind a bit of the objectives and the process and methodology we are using as part of developing those data standards, and then we'll really dive into the a first working proposition that we prepared for the public service model and the public organization model, and the idea is to do that by using some illustrative examples that will help all of us to grasp, okay, what do we mean with those elements? How are they connected with each other? Are we missing anything? And that's where all of you will be really needed to get that kind of information. And then, as last time, we will finish with a wrap-up and next steps. And with no further ado, let's dive into it. As you have seen, we started the recording of the webinar. If anyone wants to object to that, please raise it in the chat. Otherwise, as last time, I know it's not done yet, but we will share the recording with the entire working group. And good practices in general, if you don't speak, please mute yourself, but I see that everyone is quite familiar with those kind of rules right now. And there are different ways of interacting with the rest of the audience. You can, of course, raise your hand, and I will make sure to give you the floor. Feel free to share your opinion also in the chat, and there will be different kinds of questions during the webinar. You can always react to that by a +1 or -1 in the chat if you agree or disagree. Usually, if you disagree, we will also ask you why. Yeah, so similarly to last time, what are we doing here? We are trying to develop two data models. They are connected to each other, but they serve slightly different objectives. We are trying to develop the public service model and the public organization model. And what does it mean developing a model? It means basically identifying the key elements, the key pieces of information that help to describe a public service or help to describe a public organization. And what is important to remind us is to remember is that we are trying to define harmonized data models. So we are not trying to define a model that is specific to one domain, but really models that can be used by any public administrations in Belgium. And today we will, as I said, introduce initial propositions of the models, and we will do that through some examples. The idea is to really give you the keys so that later on, when we share specifications, data models on GitHub, you can also go through it and understand what is behind it, so that you can make your own examples, use your own use cases by yourself while reviewing the content of the models. That's very important. And as mentioned, we will also discuss open points. So last time we introduced also the models, and that's what I just explained. What are we trying to do to develop data models with specifications? Specifications is just a way of saying a document that describes the characteristics of the models. And that's where it's also pretty much needed that we make those specifications and models useful for all of you, for any public administration in Belgium. And that's where we really need the involvement of both domain experts, but also meaning people from the field, from any related to any specific public service or any specific public organization, and but also people with experience in data modeling itself. But no one is required to join the working group. And just an example of a semantic specification. I will put the link in the chat. If you give me a second. And I will also show you. When we say specification, it can be in various data formats. One format that is rather common in the past years is HTML, where you can find information such as a summary of the context. You can find some metadata about the document, and then more related to the content of a data model, you can find a UML class diagram or a class diagram in general, and specific information about each piece of information within the model, with a description, how to use it, the related attributes that this concept has, etc. But the idea today is not to give you a crash course of modeling, but just to give you an idea of what are we trying to achieve here. And ICEG has developed already a methodology to develop models. The idea is, as you know, to do that through working groups. And what is very important is we are in the third step. We have created an initial draft, and now we are starting the fourth today through a series of webinars where we interact with each other, and between each webinar there will be time for the editorial team on our side to elaborate further the models and the specifications behind, and every time to share it back with you so that you can add comments, review it, have some time between the webinars to actually do proper reviews. And this will end up with a formal public review of approximately 2 months. And then we will finalize the specifications, do some quality control, and really finalize the work. If anything is unclear, just let me know. Otherwise, yeah, we can go. And so last time, if you remember, we said that we would start from existing sources like European data models, such as the acronyms that you see on the screen, CPSVP, CPOV. There are basically data models at European level that have been defined for describing public service and public organizations respectively. So we thought, okay, let's not reinvent the wheel as from the start. Let's really begin with what exists already. But not only, we have also looked at your feedback from Mural. If you remember, we did an exercise trying to capture the information, the concepts that you would like to see as part of those models. We have mapped, meaning compared those information with CPSVP and CPOV. And we have done that also for Nostra and Oslo descriptions, which are two standards that are used in Belgium today. From there, what we said, or what we did, is create first visuals of the data models, and we will dive into that in a second. But basically, that will be the basis for discussion today. It doesn't mean that we have included everything from Mural and Nostra and Oslo, but of course we are happy to discuss anything that would be needed. That's really the objective of today. So yeah, let's start with public service. So the key use cases we discussed last time concerned, based on the descriptions of my public service, I want to be able to find information easily, or more easily than today. So the access to information is one thing that was mentioned as very important. The second was, thanks to common descriptions, to a harmonized data model, I want to be able to actually use and integrate information coming from different sources independently from the public administration, region, community, etc., and harvest it and collect it in one, so that I can put some business logic next to it. And this would also improve the searchability and also be able to improve the machine processability of information. Thirdly, we mentioned that we would like to really describe the steps taken by different parties, different people with different roles in order to provide or receive a public service. And related to the second one, we'd like to be able to harvest information directly from the source. So not only from different sources, but also directly from the source where the decisions are taken. So it can be sometimes at local level, it can be at any different levels of administrations. And based on those use cases, so we have defined this model. It's probably a bit small. If it's too small, just let me know. But so here, what you can see is we have, of course, the class of public service, because this will be kind of the core of the model we are going to define. And this public service as basically is coming from a specific legal framework, some legal resources that are setting the framework around this service. And through this framework, we have different rules that implement this legal piece of information, this legal text, and the public service is supposed to follow these rules. The public service is usually related, one or many public services are usually related to an event, for example, giving birth or getting married, as we will see in a minute. And a public service usually requires different criteria. So it has different requirements from the beneficiaries of the service in order to be eligible to get access to the service. And those criteria or requirements are usually proven by showing some pieces of evidence. An evidence can be your ID card, it can be your birth certificate, etc., etc. Then we have the abstract concept of agent. An agent is basically any person, organization that is taking a role, that is active in the provision or in the any step of the public service. So it can be an end user, it can also be a service provider. And this agent, as I mentioned, can take different roles within, so can participate in different ways in the public service. As from the moment the public service has been provided, has gone through all the different steps, usually an output is created. It can be the act, the authentic act behind the public service. It can be your tax declaration. It can be many different things. And finally, before we dive into it, a public service can be accessed through different channels. A channel must be understood as a medium through which you access or you interact with between agents related to this specific public service. For example, it can be a phone, it can be a physical place where you go, for example, to the city hall. It can be via email. So you may think of this as different technologies or medium through which you interact as part of this public service. And of course, depending on the channel, but also depending on other things, on other factors, a public service may have different costs. But that's it for a first glance at what we propose. But let's use the example to really dive into it. Again, if there are any questions, don't hesitate. So the example we want to use is rather straightforward. Is okay. Jane Doe wants to get married, but she would like really to have to receive more information before actually deciding to proceed with this formality or not. And basically, she starts her journey by typing some keywords in a web browser. And based on the keywords, she finds a website of the competent authority behind. In this case, she's looking to get to, she's living in Odergem in Brussels, and she would like to then to receive information from that municipality directly. And so she accessed the homepage, not Belgium.be, but the homepage of Odergem, and she used some filters such as, for example, I want to find information about for end users like citizens like me and not businesses, and I'm actually interested in a specific life event, which is getting married. And based on those filters, she's able to find the proper page where information is stored and is displayed to her. And on this page, she finds, for example, information about the criteria and the accepted evidence to prove those criteria. And then before applying, she thinks, okay, I still have some questions. I would like to give a call to a civil servant that will be able to help me answer my remaining questions. And so she finds a phone number plus when she will be able to call during open hours to a specific person, and she does that, and the civil servant is able to simply to reply to all her questions, and from there she goes with her partner to the city hall to prove that they are adults, to prove that they are not married yet, and to prove also that one of them is Belgian. This is required. All those requirements are actually coming from the Belgium Civil Code. And how Jane and her partner prove that, they simply give their ID cards. And then the civil servant and or the system simply they check that the information is correct. And from there, after receiving the confirmation, Jane simply books a time slot for the ceremony, and she also pays the cost of getting married. Depending on the day, the cost may vary. And on the day, she goes to the right address, and during the ceremony, as most of you probably know, they will need to sign the certificate, and that's actually the final output of this procedure. Come on. Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry. Okay, good. Sorry for that. Let's go back. So now let's see how this fits into the model. So we saw that Jane wants to get married. That's a life event. It's really something that happens in your life at a certain moment in time, of course, if you want to. And based on that, she wants to find information about how is the delivery of the marriage certificate going to happen, and her participation as an agent. So Jane is a person, and a person, as a person, she's also an agent, which is an abstract concept to capture information about person, people, organizations. And so her role within this public service is being a beneficiary. She really starting the request, and she will benefit from this service. And then one important question is, at this moment in time, are there important pieces of information like identifiers that you use to detect who is acting in which role? What kind of roles do you have? So I don't know if at this stage people wants to answer how they use identifiers in their cases.
Can I talk or should I?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay, perfect. At this point, at this stage, when requiring information about this specific public service, I think the main common identifiers are those of the public service itself and the generic offer that is given by government, by public organizations, not so much as the agent that requires information about the public service stated here. At this point, when we're requiring information about, at a later point in time, I think other identifiers will come into play, but at this point, it's only about what is the live event, what's the public service, and for example, what is the role that you're trying to engage within the public service at this point. I think those are the common identifiers that we need to have in place.
Yeah, so you identify the service.
And the live event, and for the sake of interoperability, for the sake of sharing information between federal government, between Oudergem, between, for example, the province of Vlaams-Brabant. I don't know.
Yep.
But you need to have those interoperable at any time. The service, the live event, and maybe the role, the role you're playing within this public service.
Yeah, and which kind of identifiers do you use? Is it a list from a code list, or is it more than that with a specific scheme to make them always unique?
For the public service in itself, you want to use URI, a public dereferenceable URI, leading to some kind of catalog describing the public service. For the live event, the role and so on, you can use code lists, I think, because those will be very specific depending on the public organization organizing the public service. It's my insights in any case.
Thanks. Any reaction to this? Any similar or different opinion? Yeah,
Hello everyone. I'm sorry, I was away for a few minutes, so I'm not sure it's been discussed, but this type of organization in the model regarding beneficiaries is quite different from the approach we have taken, because we make beneficiaries actually a special kind of agent. I would refer as an agent, for example, as a I don't know, an intermediary, which could be a public organization or not a public organization. For example, an accountant, or as we said, a notary. And besides, to our experience, we need more refinement on the description of beneficiaries. What is a beneficiary? What is their status? And how can they find themselves in our model? That's the main point. I can be a citizen, but as a citizen, I can be, I don't know, a dog owner, or I can be an employment seeker. I can be someone wanting to getting married, or I can be a parent, and those are very different situations. And if the goal is to communicate towards the general public about public services, I think we need a little bit more precision about this. And I would certainly not reduce a beneficiary to one identifier. In our own model, we have several identifiers. We have several categories of, as we say, target public, and we could have as many as needed. So maybe this could fit in the notion. I'm not sure it could fit in the notion of participation, because participation is kind of relationship between the service and the agent. It's not about the profile of the agent, but the profile of the agent is important to define its relationship to the service.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you say, Bernard, because of course here we make a simple example to start, but then it means that on your side you will be willing to go deeper into the details of describing not only agents but specific types of agents, such as a person, or maybe we should even go deeper and say a beneficiary, so a specific role that this person has. But I saw also that Michiel and Thomas raised again their hands as well. So Michiel, I think you were first.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I think I understand what Bernard was mentioning, and I think it's important. I think the granularity of the roles that people can play in a public service. I do think it's important to make a distinction between. I think it also becomes clear in the example of Bernard, what was Bernard mentioning. But I think we need to make a distinction between the identifier of the agent, the citizen in that case. So it's always the same citizen. So you need to have one identifier if you want to for that citizen, and the role it plays within the context of a specific public service, which can be indeed a beneficiary or a specific kind of beneficiary, or maybe just the people requesting it and not being the beneficiary. In the case of parent-child relation, that happens a lot. So I think it's important to distinguish this, and I think Bernard, but just tell me if I understand it wrongly. It's mainly about that second, the role, having enough granularity and uniquely identifying the role that a person or a business or any other kind of agent can play in public service delivery, right?
Yes, I can give another example, which is fairly common. It's local administrations. A local administration like my municipality can both be, at sometimes they can be an agent as an intermediary to provide a service, and they can also be a beneficiary. For example, they receive subsidies from regions, for example. So that means that you could have many instances of participations for one agent, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's clear, I think. And Thomas, I don't know if you want to add anything.
A little thing we mentioned earlier: code lists versus URIs and general dereferenceable identifiers. I think this specific type is something that is specific to the role and the beneficiary, and the kinds of beneficiaries that can be identified are very specific to the public organization that organizes the public service. So in the best case scenario, you have some exercise when defining a new type of beneficiary, for example, for dog owners or whatever you may define to. In the best case scenario, you have some governance defining new roles, new types of beneficiaries, new types of participation that are also dereferenced to, in the best case scenario, to other public organizations doing the same type of public service. It's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that you have your own code list that at minimal is somewhere published, so others can review, can view, can access the types of beneficiaries that are identified within your public organization. So,
yep.
But it has to be specific, because every other commune, every other public organization has its own lists of roles identified within their public services. You can't lift that to a generic level, I think.
And so probably indeed, so I understand that capturing the role of different agents, different people taking, participating in different ways in the public service is very important. We need to give the ability to go to a certain level of details, a certain level of granularity to be able to show the different roles taken. So not only beneficiary, but go deeper than that. And indeed, this requires also to make sure that either we are able to harmonize and it's an exercise on its own, or simply we give the flexibility for everyone to, with some guidelines on how to do that, for everyone to create or to use their own code list of terms. But so that's an action point probably on our side to look a bit within the community, within the participants of this working group, to see what are the practices today. Yep. Good. Now, in the example, Jane is using a web browser to actually type some keywords and find a specific website as a reply. So you see here in the public service that you could, within your model, capture different kinds of keywords, such as marriage, and then as different types of answers. One could be, for example, the homepage of the municipality where Jane is looking for information. So in this case, Oudergem. And you can indicate different information about this page, such as the fact that it's actually a website. And in the description, you can mention that it's also the homepage of the municipality of Oudergem. That's information about the channel, about the website itself. And then what is also important is that you identify why does Jane trust this website, because she sees that it looks like the official website of the municipality. So it's basically a channel that is owned by the municipality of Oudergem, the public organization behind, which is also the competent authority responsible for the public service from a legal point of view. And I think that's also important, is first, do we always have a competent authority? And second, if yes, is this competent authority always from a legal point of view?
Any lawyers at the table? Any constitutional lawyers at the table?
In general, in your experience, is each public service as a single public organization responsible for this service?
Maybe specific for this one, but I don't think you can state that for every public service within society. I think there are many examples that services are intermingled between regional, local, federal governments working together to deliver something. I think there's only one competent authority that's the final responsible for a public service, but there are many other public organizations intermingled to deliver something.
Yeah, but you still mentioned, right, that there's always one ultimately responsible for the service.
Yes,
is that correct?
that's a rather abstract notion. In the end, federal may be responsible for delivering a marriage certificate, federal government, but that is, I don't know the specifics, but that can be the giving of the marriage certificate can be, the right of giving the marriage certificate can be given to the local government from the federal government. The federal may be then responsible in the end.
Yeah.
I'm not sure such structure makes sense, but I think something like that can happen in practice.
We also solved the same question while doing the example. So it's exactly why we need to instruct about that. But yeah, Bernard, you wanted to say something?
Yes, let me take a small example. Building permits. For a building permit in Wallonia, I don't know in Flanders, but I think it's roughly the same logic. It really depends. It's one public service, okay, I would say, to allow someone to build something. But depending on the person who asks, the beneficiary, the nature of the beneficiary, depending on the place, depending on the time of the within the cycle of the service, the competent authority might be different. There might be several competent authorities. Some authorities will lose their hands at some point because some event, and some other authority will take charge. So it can be very, very intricate to describe in detail. That's why I ask, why is there a lawyer in the meeting, because because it's really sometimes that's intricate.
And so how do you do it today? How do you link a public organization and a public service?
Nobody does that.
Nobody does that. Go ahead.
Well, we try to do that.
We try, yes.
No, it's if I can jump in, I think Bernard has a good example. I'll turn my camera on. Bernard has a good example. Another example is that permits like a service where you are the competent authority to do planning, spatial planning. It all depends on the localization of where you're doing the planning. If it's on the municipal level, it will be the municipality who will be the competent authority. If it's on the really big projects like throwing the spatial planning of Antwerp around, it will be on a regional level. It's all about spatial planning, but the question is it twice the same service? That's what I ask myself. Is a spatial planning on the municipal level, is that the same service as on the regional level? I don't think so. I was also, and I see something related in the chat. Maybe you have to link outcomes to that service. So that you can group what is this service, not only what is the product of this service, but what is the intended outcome. What impact do you want to make? And maybe then you can also play with the combination of those two classes. You have two services that from at first sight they look the same, making a plan or issuing a permit, but when you couple those with outcome, a specific outcome, it might be clear that they're two separate things or different things on another, the same things but on a different level. But yeah, I was the one saying you don't do that. It's the issue that Bernard explains is, yeah, it just happens. It's politics. At one point, that service is just, or that instance of that service is issued to a higher level in the hierarchy.
Yeah. Thanks, Pascal. Michiel, you want to react to that?
Yeah, I thought I lowered my hand already, but actually Pascal said what I wanted to say. Indeed, the question could also be asked in the other way. If it's another competent authority, really another organization being responsible for it, then is it really the same service? And that's I think that's also just a decision that needs to be made. At what level do we call something another service, and to what extent do we put it under the same service? It's there's no right or wrong there. I think there's some wrong there. I think, but there's I think a gray zone and a decision that needs to be made, and probably it might be a good criterion, also not the only criterion, but might be one of the good criteria to say, okay, then it's a different service, because it will make things easier, I think, in terms of management, also of the description of the data of the public service.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So I understand also that it means we need to look into different ways of differentiating public services. One way that was just mentioned is the special coverage or the jurisdiction in which a public organization is actually has the mandate. Are there others? And Thomas, you wanted also to say something, and then Bernard.
Yes, it's in the line of what you're saying at this point. Public service is created by some governance, by some legislation defining the public service, starting from a public organization. The example of Antwerp, mobility, the whole mobility issue around Antwerp, it's typically the one responsible for that part, for such projects, is typically the Flemish government, so the regional government. The commune of Antwerp is too small to do such things. But laying out a new street in a municipality is typically municipality that's responsible for doing that. So, but at the source of that, another kind of legislation is starting. You have ministry, you have the government of the Flemish government, and the minister Jan Bon, who defines with his colleagues something about Antwerp. But on the other side, you have the mayor and the, how do you say it, the alderman from a municipality that defines something. That's another legislation defining the public service.
Yep.
That's the differentiation between those two, in my opinion. And
so for you,
it's another public service, yep. Which doesn't mean that one can relate to another in any case. So the one is an instantiation of the other, perhaps. It can be perfect, be modeled like that. But those are other public services in any case.
So for you, what is important is to be able to first differentiate on certain grounds public services, but also to connect them, to relate them to each other when they are related. Yes,
because the only way to escape the pitfall of the many life events, the many types of code lists and so on, is getting those public services to view to each other, learn from each other, and make it easy for one to adopt to another in defining, in describing those things. If you don't do that, you come into a variety of life events of different code lists, and you can't get any improvement on definition of those public services.
Yep.
It's my personal opinion in any case.
Yep. Thanks. Bernard?
Yes, just another quick remark to add a little bit more pepper to the discussion. They could be, for us, the same service, they could be several competent authorities. Let me take just one example. If I go back to the building permits, you could say, or let me take another example. Paying taxes. You will have some federal taxes, and then communes or provinces will add taxes to that, and they will be specific. So you have, for each commune, for example, you have the ability to make more legislation on top of the general one. So it's a use case that we usually fall over a lot, because when and it's very difficult for us to address local public service because of that complexity. By articulating a general law and then local specifics that are always possible, and that can go many ways sometimes.
Yeah.
For example, for building permits, each municipality could add specific requirements. For example, some would require a digital copy of the application, and some wouldn't. Some would require some additional information compared to others, stuff like that. So they can legislate themselves on some issues.
For me, that's an example of different public services that one works on another.
Mm-hmm.
And you add something to it, you create new legislation as a local partner, and you create something new that's only specific to your municipality, not the rest of the world. While the other is applicable to the whole of the Walloon region or the Belgian region or whatever. So
yes, if you have I agree. If you have some kind of classification of public service and you can derive one from another, then
yes.
you can solve that complexity.
Yes, I understand.
There is also something in the middle from the example, from what has been said now, is that there are, and I don't see that in the parts that I've seen from the model now, is that there are also long-running services. They take a lot of time to complete, and there are numerous steps that have to be taken by the service consumer asynchronously, because it takes time for the administration to complete the first step of maybe 10 steps of that service. For instance, issuing an environmental permit also requires to involve other public organizations, not just the one that you have to address your request for a permit, but then at one point that the administration will say, now you have to go to all these other administrations involved, and you have to ask a advies, and I can't.
A consult or something.
A consult, yes,
Yeah.
and for the service consumer, the one who requests a permit, it's one service. It's requesting a permit, but there are numerous service steps that are have to be taken, and they're not always to the same, or often not to the same public organization or competent authority.
Yeah, if I understand well, Pascal, that's where we can also make use of, for example, live and business events, because from where you compare the end user perspective and the administration perspective, for the end user, it's all about one service in the end from his or her perspective. But from administration, it's more like, okay, someone wants to build a house, a building, and for that he or she needs a permit. That's the single output. But in between, maybe there are several public services indeed that are required and connected to each others. The question is, how do
Sometimes.
we?
Sometimes you can
yes,
say,
sometimes
yes, now you have to, I am in the context of requesting an environmental permit, and the organization that I ask the permit for now tells me, now also go to this other organization and request a consult. Is that a different service? Yeah, you could say that at a lower level, maybe it's decomposition of the higher of the requesting a permit, but it's just a step that that you ask the requester to take, and it's he would rather not having to take that step. He would rather to be, have it all in one package. Here is my request and deal with it. But it's not working that way. And is it a live event or a business event? No, it's in the same events requesting a permit or requiring a permit.
Yeah, Bernard, Thomas, at this stage, I would prefer that we keep this level of discussion for later, also because at this moment in time, we didn't dive into that level of details yet.
Okay.
But I think it's very important to keep that, and after the webinar, contribute through GitHub to prepare further discussions, and then in the next webinar, we can dive into such more detailed topics, I think.
Okay. No problem.
Okay. But anyway, thanks for the contribution so far on that. One maybe related topic is the keywords. I don't know to what extent this is something that you use a lot within administrations. The fact to capture keywords that actually characterize or are useful for different usages related to a public service. For example, here we used marriage, as this is probably one keyword that the person used. One important thing is we are not here talking about how to fill in this field, but more about, is it useful, yes or no, first.
We're using it in any case. We have some internal classification logic
to create them,
to manage them, and so on. But it's internal. It's not on a generic level.
Yeah. And Pascal, was it also related to that? When you raised hand?
I think it's still raised.
I have my hands still.
Okay, no worries. Any other opinion on this, or we simply I understand that there is interest of having a keyword field.
Yes, from a point of view of a catalog of services.
Exactly, for that types of use cases.
Informing broad audience about public services or government.
Okay, good. Then we enter into more channels types of discussions where from the keywords and the results of her search, Jen is able to find the homepage of the municipality of Oudergem, and from there use different filters, categorizations, such as here in the example proposed through live events, for example, the list of live events on the website, and as a user you quickly understand and select the one that are actually relevant for your search. Or it can be also, depending on the level of administration you are looking at for the service, it can be okay, where do you live? Oh, I live in this municipality, and therefore you find automatically the right page with the information. And that's where she is able to find the specific page with information about the marriage certificate itself. And then once she goes to that page, as mentioned, she finds information about criterion requirements, like you need to be an adult in order to get married, and you can prove that by using your ID card, for example. This is just an example of criterion on the one hand and evidence on the other. The question is, do you have, I suppose you do, but are there existing classifications in the different governments or regions about the types of requirements used? So, for example, here we say the age limit is one, could be one term within such classifications. Not sure.
Aren't we here in the area of business rules, where you want to have some flexible way of describing them without being constrained by classifications.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think also, yes. Yeah.
So you would leave that out of this discussion at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think it's. I think you want to evolve to that. If you want machine readability at one point, you need that description. But it's. I think it will more evolve in the terms of business rules that can be consumed by a machine.
Yep.
I think we have to get every classification of criterion requirements to be open and accessible to all other parties. So we have to move on to learn from each other. That's something we can say from this working group, I think. If you do have something, make sure it's accessible to every other person on this world, so they can learn from you. But the specific classification, I don't think that is something we use at this point.
Okay. So does everyone agree that we proceed like this for now? Maybe you can type it in the chat.
Same here. We don't classify criteria and requirements at this point. This is a whole other universe, and I agree that it can be very useful, but it's a very long way.
Yeah, exactly. So I see 2 reactions. Third one, thanks. Alvin, sorry if I pronounced it not correctly, proposed to leave it optional. I think it's aligned with also here, indeed. Okay, so we'll keep it this way and we'll make it optional. Good. Then, as from the moment the person's identified information within the web page, she would like to get extra information to her questions, and so she finds information about a contact point with a phone number and general opening hours for this contact point, Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. Yep, I think that's straightforward. The question is, do you model today, or do you use various types of contact points? And if yes, what do we need to capture within a Belgian level? So if I rephrase, would it be useful for you if we simply leave contact point very open, or if we define more details, such as how to describe a phone number or how to describe an email address, etc. So do we need to go one level deeper into the modeling here of this aspect?
No, there's also chat bots now, and
yep.
And it's I was also, is this to ask information about the public service, because it also seems related to the channel. It's I personally, I wouldn't go too much into too much constraining.
If I can add, I agree with Pascal. There's a little bit of I wouldn't say confusion, but it's not very clear how all those concepts can be interrelated. For example, to us, we kind of make a big soup with contact points and authorities, maybe agents, and we won't particularly discriminate the modes of contacts. For one point, we will have the the website, the phone numbers, and the address in the same, entity is maybe not a good practice. I don't say it's an example to follow, but actually I had a little bit of trouble fitting our own way of functioning into the proposed model for this. But it's also very rich for us to learn how can things be done better. But still, I'm not super convinced that this is clearer.
Yes, I think that there are two use cases intertwingling here. The type phone, the channel side. It comes from the use case of delivering a catalog of services, by example, giving insights to which public services are accessible by phone or by email or by digital ways, while the other is a very discrete description of if you want to take use of my public service I grant you as a municipality or as a public government, you have this contact point to contact me regarding this public service. It's something entirely different from the channel from which you can use, and you don't have to have both. If you only have the use case of delivering public services in a discrete manner, your contact point is good, I think. You don't have to add the channel to that point. If you make your website where you can search through all public services you give, you have the channel class to give insight to for which public service you have to go physically to the city hall, or for which I can use the phone or email or whatever. It's two different use cases, and depending on the use case you have, you take one or the other or both.
Does everyone agree with that? The fact that here, channel and contact point are two different use cases, and that both would not be required in any case.
In best case, the codes in contact points and the type in channel have the same code list behind them that you can choose from.
Yep.
That's governance, it's not semantics.
So I don't know if you can type in the chat if you agree with that.
Please state if I'm wrong or if I'm babbling about this.
And Jean-Christophe, I agree with what you're saying. Like, contact information is important regarding data quality issues, and that's what we need to ensure is that minimum rules should be defined and respected. So that's, and I think it's also related to what Thomas said about governance. But yeah, those are two complementary things. So yeah, that's maybe the level to which we could aim at.
We have to be aware of making something mandatory, because on the point of when you define a public service in the very beginning, when legislation is voted, you don't have a contact point at that point. We have to be aware of making it ourselves unreal to register something that isn't there at that point. And then at that point, we have to imagine some contact point in order to register it, and we don't want that.
Yeah, great point. It has implications on the implementation aspect.
If you make something mandatory, you have to be aware that it's always mandatory, no matter the state it's in.
Yeah, and so I also understand the comment from Jean-Christophe that it would actually be useful to know if I want to describe a phone number, this is the format we should use so that it's actually understandable and interoperable between administrations.
Completely.
The same for email addresses, etc. Of course. Okay, good. Of course, Jean-Christophe, if you want to take the floor or any others, you can of course do it via the chat, but you can also directly mention it afterwards. Continuing on the example side, this is simply to show that you can have actually different instantiations of agents with different roles. Like here we have John Smith, who's actually the person behind the help desk, the front line, and who will answer the phone call from Jane regarding her questions about the mortgage. Yeah, good.
Mhm.
Then looking at the legal framework and the specific criteria and evidence behind, what do we have here? So we know that from the Belgian Civil Code, which has a specific reference here to the article, the public service requires different criteria in order to for someone to be eligible for getting married. And in this case, the three main criteria are actually being an adult, not being married yet, and at least one of the people should be Belgian, should have the Belgian citizenship. And how can they simply do that? They can provide their ID card at the municipality, and this will then launch some requests in the system and checking their nationality, etc. And based on that, we'll get some answers. So the evidence is, we need to show who is providing the evidence. We are showing to which service this evidence is connected, and this is also through public service. This is making the link to the specific criteria. Question is, yeah, let me continue and then we'll go to the questions. This is simply to show that the agent or the system here, we took an agent, checks the information. So the role taken here is quite generic, I agree, but that's for the example. So the service provider is checking the information provided thanks to the ID cards. We answered that question about the role. Here, one question we have is actually, to what level of detail should we model those checks? The fact that a machine can do it, or the fact that it's a human doing it? Looking at the evidence provided, looking at the information, and comparing it with the actual requirements. For example, if the law changes to 16 years old or 20 years old, who will do the check compared to the ID card?
Ideally, you do that on a very discrete manner, and you want full automated public service deliverance in the end. I think we're going all to that point. What I'm missing here is at which point in the rules regarding the public service is some criterion involved or not. If you follow me, because not every role in every public service delivery has even access to every criterion requirement involved. I think not every partner or every agent has to have access to the ID card of Jane Doe. From their point of view, it's not even eligible, or it's not even allowed at some points.
Mm-hmm.
Same for the consult Pascal was referring to earlier on. Some partners only need to know the consult was positive in order to move on in the rules of the public service delivery. So I'm missing here a bit at which part in public service delivery is this the criterion requirement involved? At which rule? And you have to have discrete rules. The 10 points, you have to move on. And some are machine driven, some are people driven, and some have criterion requirement involved and some not. But maybe that's too much detail for this kind. I'm not sure what we're trying to do here.
That's a bit the question is like, do we want to go to the level where we actually dive into the delivery of the service?
Yes. For me, that's another application profile in itself.
It could be, indeed. Yeah. But I know it was also an important use case mentioned in the first webinar.
Yes.
And so I think it's important that we discuss about it. Bernard, you wanted to react?
Yes, I just wanted to react to what Thomas was just saying. His last sentence was exactly what I wanted to address. If we understand this exercise as something that has to go to that has the goal of informing about public service, this is sufficient, because we will know what will be needed at some point in the procedure. We don't dive into the insides of the beast, but it might be the next step. But the question is this the purpose? If the purpose is to inform, this is sufficient, I would say.
Yes.
Pascal, you want to react, and then I have a question for the audience. Go ahead.
Yes, maybe something that might be interesting to look into in the context of the single digital gateway. There is a plan, I don't know how far it has evolved, to set up a system between all countries to exchange evidence. So for particular procedures that should be accessible by other citizens from other countries, and you need a certain proof of, I don't know, a certification that you're allowed to execute a certain type of job. And in the SDG verordening, there's the plan has been described to set up such a system, which I think is crazy to implement and to design, but it might be interesting to look into how far this has evolved, and maybe there's something of an inspiration there.
Yeah, I think it's an important message indeed. On the SDG aspect, so indeed what they want to do as part of this regulation is to ensure that a citizen is only requested once for the same type of information. So if any administration in Europe holds this information already, such as the age from an authentic source, I understand. So the age of the applicant, then a Belgian public administration or a Dutch public administration should not ask again the same information if it's known somewhere in Europe. That's the main idea indeed, and that requires, as you mentioned, Pascal, the exchange of information from requirements and evidence and how to match those two together.
Yeah, but to be clear, it's a specificity of the once only principle, and it's focused on that evidence. That's why I mentioned it. So it's really a system to exchange evidence of certain permits that a person has, and maybe they have something reusable or in terms of inspiration that they use in their data model for our exercise.
Yeah, they've started defining some models. They haven't been agreed yet between the member states, but yeah, discussions are ongoing. I don't think there will be something before the end of the summer, and then this would be a first level of modeling, but of course, from an inspiration point of view, it could start then after the summer period, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so my question was, do we stick to the information level, or do we go into the delivery aspects? So let me rephrase. Do you agree that we stick to the informational level at this stage or not?
I do.
You can put, of course, a +1 in the chat, indeed.
Indeed. This choice isn't saying it shouldn't be machine processable. That's another discussion.
Yeah, it's indeed. But to make it modeled, it requires further steps.
Yes.
That is, for now, if we agree, beyond the initial scope of this exercise. It doesn't mean that we cannot reopen this box later on, but let's start with the beginning problem. Okay, good. Then we continue. Let's look briefly into the cost and address side. So once the sorry for the small duplicate. Once the agent from the civil servant has checked the different information, the Jane is actually able to register to book a time slot online, and on the day itself, she can pay beforehand, and on the day itself they can go to the city hall for the marriage ceremony. How did we capture this so far? Is a public service as a cost in a certain currency. Here we use an identifier coming from the publications Office of the European Union to identify the euro currency. This is maintained directly by Europe, so we find it quite useful to directly reuse it. And the value is estimated at 200 euros for the specific time slot she picked. And then how do we capture the address? It's actually, we consider it outside this model because it's more related actually to the public organization. So we thought of describing it as part of the public organization model. And then here we captured simple information about the full address. In practice, we can dive into much more details of the address, how to define it, do we need to capture more information, etc. But we thought it was a bit outside the scope of describing the public service. Thomas, you have a reaction?
2 reactions in any case. In discussions earlier on regarding CPS VIP, cost was in function of channel. So you could have a different cost in terms of different channels from which you take off for public service.
Yeah, I think
either you should have multiple costs defining what's the meaning of that multiple costs within public service. That's one way to put it. Or you have a combined link between public service channel and cost. I think that's a correct way of modeling this one. Cost isn't directly linked to public service in itself. You should have.
Yeah, in CPS VEP, if we mention that, there are 2 links indeed, one directly between public service and cost, and one between channel and cost. I think the important question is, how are costs defined today? And I agree it might differ according to the channel, but sometimes there could be many different ways of picking the costs, right?
Yes, indeed. And the modeling is good in my opinion. Currency stating the referenceable URI and a value put in. That's okay for me. But the other thing I wanted to address is the address. The address put here is.
Thomas, sorry to interrupt. Should we go to the address right after, so that we stick to the?
Perfect. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Keep it for right after. Yes. Let's hear about the others. So here the proposition is to put only a placeholder, a field for capturing numbers describing the value of the cost. But so far, in this example at least, we don't propose to go beyond that. The question is, do we want to go beyond? Do we want to dive into certain complexity levels of defining the cost? For example, by relating it to channel, or by saying, oh, if you want to apply some business logic, let's try to capture that. So that's the first question. I don't know if people want to say something about it, or if you can also directly react in the chat. So if you want to go beyond and define the complexity, you can type a -1 to change a bit.
Well, I think cost is very critical to audience looking for some public service. So it has to be accurate and it has to be correct.
Mm-hmm.
Even more so than public service in itself for many people in society.
Yeah.
So it should be eligible to differentiate. In any case, either defining costs in relation to channel or giving some more meaning or some more to cost in itself.
So maybe just an example. Let me show.
So I'll type -1 in the chat.
Yep.
To do something else.
For example, this is the case of marriage in Nottingham.
Yes. Yes.
Where the cost actually differs according to the day and time.
Yes.
Sorry, it's in French, but yeah.
No problem.
So, for example, on Saturday mornings, as from 10:30, it's 200 euros. Saturday afternoon, between 12 and 4, it's actually 300 because probably more people are asking for that time, or yeah.
So you have different costs within this
depending on
service.
the opening hours.
Yes.
Yep. And this is just one example for one public service. I can imagine that the cost can become very complex as well.
Yes.
So the factors behind can vary a lot. The question is, will we be able to model at Belgian level something generic enough to capture the different, with the right level of flexibility, the different variations of the costs?
Not at the Belgium level.
No. But you need some extra field on cost or what the relation has cost, defining the broader context in which this cost is applicable. Some free text.
Okay. Yeah.
So you can interchange that information also.
Yep. Makes sense. Other opinions about the cost?
Yes. It can be very, very complex, and sometimes defining the cost is one step of the procedure in itself. If I go back to environmental permits or building permits, it's exactly the case. And those costs can vary again from one municipality to another. And it depends on the nature of the project, on totally arbitrary criteria from one municipality to another.
Yep.
So it's quite hard to modelize this. I would be more open if the goal again is to inform the public to add an open field to just make any explanation that needs to be done to be made at that point. But if you need to modelize precisely the costs, it can be very, very, very tricky.
Yep. Okay, so I understand that you're in favor of keeping so far the informal information giving use case, and that the diving into the cost definition can be on more a specific implementation model or application profile model. And Thomas, you say the extra context regarding costs, so a new field, a text field for describing how the cost was calculated, for example.
Yes, and different discrete notions of cost from one public service needs to be possible in this.
Yep. Does everyone agree with that? So agree to add one field to capture some text about the cost structure at this stage, and to leave out for now the calculation of the cost, so the business logic behind. Good. Thanks. Okay, then let's proceed with that, and we'll add the description field in the model. Yeah. One thing is important that I actually didn't mention yet is the status class. It actually helps to define, is there an action needed next, and by whom, and what is it, and what is the time frame in which it can start and end. So, for example, here, as from the moment Jane registers for the ceremony, the process continues, and the next step is actually to go to the city hall on the day she registered. And so the day is here, the 12th of August. Related to our previous discussions, my question is, do we want to do that? Do we need to do that?
This is process delivery. Yeah.
Exactly. I agree. So I find this class quite interesting, but for the process delivery, indeed. So do we keep it at this stage? I understand not really. Or are there, supports or reasons why we should keep it also for informing people about the public service?
I think this is too discrete for the purpose mentioned here.
Mm-hmm. I see, Bernard, you nodded as well. Do the others agree? Any reaction? Yeah.
I think you need more than just a status field on the public service level. It's going to be, yeah, like we said before, there are services when they're long running, you want more detail at you might have more status fields for a different step in your service execution. So
yep.
But I think it's interesting, and then it's going to be usable if this is defined the right way, but not at this level, I think, or in this stage.
Yeah, so we start with that, and as from the moment we agree, we'll see if we can dive into the delivery use cases. Yeah, okay. Other reactions? Yeah. Jean-Christophe?
Concerning the status, I have just a question, because the status for me for the public service was more related to the public service in itself. For instance, we talk about there is a new legal law, there is a new public service that is promoted by the politicians. And so should we give a notion of status, say that this public service is starting, is already in place. So giving a status to the public service, because this status corresponds more to the process, like you mentioned. So this notion of status related to public service, is it something that you will include in the model? So the life cycle of the public service.
It's a valid question. It's not captured here in the example, but I think it's very valid. Like, I understand if the service is actually deprecated, you should indicate it to make sure that internally you don't display it, or if it is displayed somewhere on a website, this information is captured as well, right? But it's true for other. So that's what you would like to capture, Jean-Christophe, correct?
Yes, that's right. Life cycle, deprecated, and
yep.
And the new one, for instance, for the mandatory data, should we publish a public service that is not yet with contact information? That's my question. There is a baby, is being built, then is born. So do we publish when the public service is really implemented by the administration, or since it's published in the legal resources? I don't know when the public service should be published, because the citizens, if there is no administration that has implemented what the politician says, that's no use for them. Okay, they know there is a new public service that is coming, but there is no process in place, there is no cost defined, there is no criteria defined, and I don't know if we should publish them as earlier as that.
Yep. So how would you capture that? By adding a property, an attribute within the public service class, like status of the public service?
For me, yes, we should have a status in the public service, but really the status of the public service, not this status, which is another notion for me.
Yeah, indeed. Do the others agree with that? But
Yes.
for adding one field within the public service class here about the status of the public service from a life cycle management. Okay. Okay, good. Good. Then let's proceed with that. Let me quickly check also if. Yeah, indeed. Let's go back quickly to address, Thomas. So just repeating, what we propose here is we think that address is relevant in certain cases for the public service, but we think it's more related to a public organization. So we can definitely have ways to model it, but it will be part of public organization model, and we can reuse that. So
Yes,
the
but
proposition is to do it like this, and the question behind this or interpretation is that it's always related to a public organization or an agent.
well, we'll have to have the discussion of public organizations still to come, but the address, in my experience, the address of public organization is the point where you can get in contact with the public organization as a whole you're describing. And that may be something different than the address in which you can get public service. Could be the same, it shouldn't be the same. So if you do that, you need to have all addresses, that all public services can be acquired to be linked to the public organization, and then you'll have to have some differentiator, some indicator denoting this public service can be acquired at this address.
Yeah,
that's missing here in this model.
Yep.
I'm not sure if this is going too far, or isn't it easier to have some indicator somewhere on the has competent authority / address relation to say this is the address denoting this public service. No, not sure how we can model this, but as it's stated here, it's not correct in my opinion.
Yeah, so you would indeed, there could be different addresses, and we need to be able to capture that, or what is the purpose of this address.
So we have to define what is the address, what is semantics of an address within the realm of the public organization. And we'll have to add something there if you need to have this one. And then we'll need some differentiator in this model saying you can choose this address from this public organization.
Yep.
And then it's still the question is the address linked to the public organization? Because a competent authority isn't always this public service deliverance.
Yeah, that's true.
And then you have a mismatch between address and public organization, so it's tricky.
Yeah, like the VAT registration, for example, there is a competent authority, but it's never this one who is actually providing the service. Yeah, okay, I get your point. Bernard, you also raised your hand.
Yes, I was saying what Pascal said in the chat. So address is more linked to channel, maybe, even though a public organization should have an address too, but it's usually not the most relevant address for the end user, in my experience. Also, having an address linked to a physical channel is very convenient because you can have many channels and address the use case that Pascal talked about, saying, well, you can have regional bureaus, and I presume those could be channels.
Yeah. So
in CPS VAP, the address is linked to the agent class and not the public organization class. So I think that's a better approach. Who delivers the service at the end? Who gets in touch with the person acquiring the public service? And that's the address.
Yeah.
Not the address of the competent authority responsible for the public service.
Yeah. So I understand that we could relate address to agent, which is more generic and could indeed not limit the scope of the address to only the competent authority. And also related to our previous discussion about the contact point, we could actually define specific ways of, like we say, the phone number, the address, the email address, but we could also define how to describe an address as part of a contact point. So it could actually make the link between the agent and the contact point. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. You can also type in the chat or react to this. Huh?
I have an observation is that in times of digital, it's peculiar. We also only give examples about an address to go to the municipality to ask for a permit, a marriage certificate, while we're trying to have as much online, of course. So it's
yes.
Yeah.
But we're still not 100% digital, I'm afraid.
And there's always the question, what do you want to propose also? Huh? That some people may not have access to internet, etc. But yeah, that's not my decision. But in any case, we can put the different options. Huh? That's for sure. Okay. Good. Then the final part is about really the output. So during the ceremony, the newly married couple signs the register, or I don't know what's the right term, and actually receives as output the marriage certificate, which here is defined directly as an output of the public service. We have also put a random identifier of this output. So if you don't think it's needed, feel free to raise it. But in general, do you need more information about this output, like a description or other types of attributes for describing the output of the public service?
Just thinking that an output could be an input for another public service or a criterion requirement. There's a use case. I'm not sure.
Also, the output here, the marriage certificate is kind of a proxy for status of the person. So the output is that the person are married, not that they receive a paper, I would say.
It's a valid comment.
Yeah.
And it refers to what you said, Thomas, about the fact that this information can also be used as an input, and in an age of cross information and authentic sources of data, this is something maybe we need to address. The output could be an information and
Data record. That's what you mean, right?
The marriage certificate is still one of the cases where you hold a document and it has the value, but there are a lot of other cases where you just, for example, if you have a baby and you register the baby, you won't get you get a birth certificate, but the most important point is not the birth certificate, is the fact that the baby is registered in the
register.
And has a NIS.
So if I understand correctly, in the definition of output, we should be able to capture not only, of course, documents, but any data records.
Maybe that's a question. I don't know.
Jean-Christophe, I see your question. So are we going to relate public service to authentic data or authentic source? I think that's what we are tackling with the question of Bernard as well. Do we need to? Probably yes, but are there opinions about that?
So again, the discussion is it's a discrete deliverance, or is it a description of a public service offering?
So probably it's going into the delivery side if we really try to make the link from a modeling perspective with base registered or authentic databases. While here, if we make sure that the definition of output captures also the fact that data records are acceptable outputs, then probably we will leave it open, but also prepare the ground for further work. Do you agree with that?
Yes, it should be type. It should be a code list or something. It should be governance between. Oh, yeah.
The type of output, you mean, right?
Yes.
It's also related to the notion of evidence you mentioned before.
Yeah, indeed, because also Thomas mentioned the output can be used as input, and in this case, in this model, the input is actually an evidence.
Same goes for a degree, for a diploma. There are many other examples.
So we will need to pay attention to. Sorry, Jean-Christophe, you want to say something?
No, I missed to my microphone. Sorry.
No worries. Okay. So we will pay attention in the definition of output to capture the different aspects or different types it can take. And we will also add a type attribute so that we can capture different types of outputs. Question is, do we need to define it, or this will be probably we'll see if there are already some classifications of outputs existing and see to what extent they match. I know that CPSVP is proposing a few. It can be a starting point. We will put it in our initial proposition and see if you agree or not with that. If you have different ones, and depending on that, we can take a decision whether we recommend a code list or not for this type. Okay.
Okay.
Good. Then going back to that's the end of the example. What we have seen, so we have covered most of the elements we propose actually in the model. There will be some changes based on our discussion. What differs is mainly we discussed about live events, but there are also different types of events, such as business events, that are actually sub-concepts of event in general. So that's just a specialization that we did in this example. Something that Thomas mentioned briefly was the rule, but in this example it didn't fit very well, but that's a general class for capturing any pieces, documents or pieces of information that helps to implement the legal text, specifically for a public service. What we didn't show either in the example is the data set, which is just a class to capture the fact that all information about the public service is actually data. And this data needs us also some descriptions, some validity dates, for example, or can be maybe found on a specific page where you can download it. Those are just examples, but it's a placeholder to capture information about the data as the descriptions of your public service. And then let me have a quick look. The concept and collection classes is just a way to capture classifications. It's less important at this stage. It's more from a modeling perspective that is interesting to have it just for correctness. Good. And with that, One thing to remind, of course, is that we picked one example. There are many other valid examples. Earlier on, we discussed, before this webinar, we discussed about an archiving example. And we mentioned earlier also the single digital gateway as something to be looked at. So I think what is important for us is to look at different examples progressively as part of this work and to see whether it fits or not the model we are defining. So feel free to share examples that you think are important for us to consider in the chat or via email or on GitHub. And we will consider them. Of course, we'll need to select some of them, but that's a general idea. And right now, I would propose, I would propose to go to Mural for a small exercise. I put the link in the chat. Let me also show it on the screen. So let me know if you have any issue in accessing Mural. But normally, once you enter Mural, you can see on the right side of the screen an outline. And this is something useful to navigate the exercise we'll be doing. And as a small reminder of Mural, if you want to contribute by adding a sticky note, it's just you double click and a sticky note appears. You can type any text and change the shape, the size of the sticky note by dragging.
Yeah, I don't know if you shared the right link because I have a problem with logging in or going to it.
Yeah, it's a link where you have to have an account.
Sorry, I shared the wrong link. Let me. Thanks. Let me share. Voila. The new link should be correct. Sorry for that.
That one works for me.
Good, thanks. And so what we will be doing is simply taking a few minutes to look at the model we just went through together. Also consider the changes that we discussed, and think about the use cases. If you click here, you see directly the use cases that we discussed in the previous webinar or today, and from those two aspects, consider first: are there some use cases that we miss? If yes, you can indicate it over here. And second, for the specific use cases, are there specific elements that would be required in the model that we don't have today? So to do that, the best is you have the model that you can zoom into as inspiration to compare it and see, yeah, I'm actually missing something we mentioned, a description of the output or of the cost. Is it there? Yeah, description of cost is there. It's actually what I'm looking for. But maybe you have examples of information that you don't see today. And then once you have an information, to which use case is it related? And for that, you can go to the list of all use cases and you look through it. And for example, you say, it's about finding information about public services more easily. So in use case 1, you can add a sticky note. I would like to find a description of something. That's one way of doing it. Another way is simply you can also use simply the use cases and think about, okay, what are the information that I need, and then check if it is available today in the public service model. it's a bit of playing. That's why make use of the outline, and I will give you 5 minutes to think about that, and then we discuss it together.
So sorry to interject. It's probably me, but I find this a bit more than a 5-minute job. I'm sure it's okay after the workshop to add stuff.
Of course, Pascal. I'm pretty aware of that. The idea is also after the webinar today to consider the discussion and agreements made, update slightly or update the model based on that, and then share it with all of us via GitHub, so that you can really have the time to dive into the details. Now it's more to capture maybe big aspects we missed. And why 5 minutes? Also because if there is not much after 5 minutes, then it means that you require more time to dive into it. But at least we know that at this stage we are not missing big parts.
Maybe to add to that, this is the first workshop where we're diving really into the model, and we're of course gonna in the workshops to follow, gonna deep dive into certain elements where we see that there's indeed some discussion around. We had quite some discussion on the competent authority already, so that's probably one. And also here it's a bit to see, okay, what are the things that we really need to zoom into and where we need to have a more in-depth discussion about. So voilà. So completeness is not necessarily the goal. We'll have time and in between the workshops and during the workshops to capture more feedback and to deep dive into certain elements.
And with that, should we have another minute, or are we good to start? I think we can start. Let's quickly go to first the missing use cases. See, so we have one missing use case, which would be about capturing the fundamentals about location, like parcels, buildings, addresses, etc. I don't know if who wrote it and if that person wants to explain it further, and why we would need also to capture it. In my understanding, it's actually useful to know how to model indeed specific locations, such as addresses, in the context of a public service. And for that, for example, at urban level, I can show you, there is the core location vocabulary, which targets at the first stage these aspects where you can define an address with many different attributes. You can also define a location more generically, or a geometry with, for example, geo-coordinates, latitude, longitude, etc. That's, in my understanding, that's a possibility we have on top of when there is a need within the public service model, we can reuse what exists over there. The question behind is, do we need it within the model itself? Address, I think we said yes. What about the others?
But is this, for instance, again, the example of requesting a permit of building something on a particular plot of land? That plot of land, how is it? So it's the subject for which you ask a permit, if I can put it that way. Is that something we want to capture as well?
So, do you understand correctly that we here in your example, we only consider the building permit or anything that requires specific information about spatial information?
No, it's not. Yeah, that's just an example that happens to be spatial information, but it's sometimes you have to request a service for something or linked to something, and in case of a building permit, it's linked to a plot of land, for instance, a parcel. How is this captured now in the model, for instance, because we say you need to provide some kind of evidence, but you also have being the owner of the plot of land, but maybe that is not, you don't have to be the owner of a plot of land to be using the service requesting a building permit.
Yeah. I don't know if there are other reactions to that. At this stage, we don't capture it because it's also context specific, meaning that in some public services you will need it, in others you won't. The question is, do we want still to capture it more generally within this model?
I think the overall use of when you say something about a parcel or an address or a building, you need to reference it to the authentic source of those concepts and use that information. I think that's the only thing we can do. For me, that's all part of the whole rule clause. If we go to discrete definition of rules and identification of rules, different steps. At some point, you have to define some reference to a parcel, for example, or a building. And then in the guidelines defining that, we should state that you should make use of beststat, for example, when it comes to an address or other JTBL, for example, for buildings, etc., etc. I'm not sure this is an overall use case for public service, but it's something you need to put in your guidelines that come with a public service definition. But I'm not sure if this is the case that's meant here. It's not my post-it in any case.
Yeah, thanks. Bernard, you wanted to react?
Yes, I wanted to add that one important use case I think we should not miss is what is the applicable procedure to my case in Belgium. We all know we live in a complicated country, and so if what we are doing now is not going to solve a part of that problem for the general public, we are missing the point, I think. So I was asking also a little bit lower in the map. What about spatial information? So, and also about the relationship between the competent authority and the federal entity. I think we need that kind of information in the model, but I'm not sure where to put it. Well, for the federal entities, it's easier, but for the spatial range where the service applies, for example, it's a little bit trickier. I've seen spatial information in the model, and I think it's what was more related to public organization, if I am not mistaken. Maybe, well, since we've discussed other use cases like regional bureaus, for example. So maybe spatial information should be also available in the model at other points.
Yeah, and so what I propose is we open on GitHub also a ticket about that, an issue, and so that you can share what kind of information would be needed from a spatial point of view, and then we discuss it in the next webinar together and we can also come with an initial proposition, and let's see to what extent we can agree on that through GitHub. And from there, we discuss it in the next webinar. Okay. Bernard, I've also added the other then use case you mentioned. What are the applicable procedures to my case as an end user? About the information we miss. So the kind of a guideline or how we are going to use URIs for the concepts. I think, yes, that's something we intend to do. Of course, for the first discussion today, we thought let's not dive into the URIs right away, but so URIs are types of identifiers, but simply that's something we will need to tackle at a certain point, and for which we can apply some good practices indeed. What you mentioned right before, Bernard, indeed, the link between the public organization and related federal entity. I think it's something indeed interesting. I don't know if people agree that we make a proposition about including that. If you can indicate in the chat a +1, or if we need to discuss it further, you can type -1. Okay, Rink. Sorry, I didn't notice so far. Thanks for indicating in the chat. But so if your micro is working at a certain point, we can always come back. But otherwise, yeah, as mentioned, we can continue that discussion through GitHub. Okay, good. So I understand that people are in favor of including the link to federal entity. The contact point I checked, it's indeed missing. So our mistake for that, we'll include it indeed. It was mentioned in the example, and the idea is indeed to have the contact point class. Then SDG related information, that's a good one. The question is, to what extent do we need it in our model directly, or do we need first the models to be agreed at European level before diving into that? It's an open question, huh? Because we could also decide to think about it in the coming webinars, so that we can also come with propositions or a point of view to the European discussions. But for me, there are two approaches. So either we wait for European discussions to really have final models agreed between the member states, and then we integrate it within our discussions here, or the other way around is we discuss it, and then that's the basis for coming with propositions towards Europe. If you're in favor of the first approach, you can type +1. And if the person who wrote it wants to explain further, feel free. Yeah?
Dear, it was me that entered this post note. I think it's important to realize that Belgian citizens, well, they are confronted with public services in Belgium at various levels of the government, but they will also be able to use services that are offered by other member states in the European Union. So the question is also, are we going to describe that as well, or are we going to take that into our scope as well? Because I think from a perspective of a Belgian citizen and a Belgian company, we should add it.
So then if I understand correctly, Mark, the proposition would be we need to make sure that at least the model we create should be able to take into account the propositions to come from the Commission side and agreed with the member states. That's the minimal. And then we could already look into what has been proposed by the Commission to see whether it fits what we are building today. I think that would be indeed a good idea. And then let's see if we can easily link and connect the elements at European level for these SDG cases to what we are building.
From my feeling, you're jumping quickly to an approach. I think Florian, I think Mark's point is that from a citizen or an company point of view, at one point it's not going to be important anymore where the certain service is going to be located. So I think Mark, that's the point you want to make, and I think it's an interesting and important perspective, even without already making some decisions. Should we wait until there's more clarity on the European level on models and so on? I think the perspective that Mark is taking is an important one.
Yes, okay. And then how would you define it? You mentioned the country of evidence, so we'll look into it and check whether we can start including some elements or think about this perspective.
Well, the country of evidence, if you're going to offer as a Belgian government institution a service to other European citizens, you will need evidence from these European citizens, but this evidence will come from abroad. Yep. They will come from other countries. So there is also in the one's only technical system that is foreseen by SDG. There are common services that are provided, that will be provided to be able to search where you can find the evidence in a certain country. So I think that this is what I mean with the country of evidence somewhere. The evidences, they will not only come from authoritative sources in Belgium, they will also come from other member states. And you have to be able to retrieve them.
Yep. It's a valid point. So I understand two things then. Let's look into what they propose at European level and see whether there are some elements that should be considered immediately as part of this data model. And second, let's also consider the fact that we said a couple of minutes ago that we won't go into the delivery aspect. So let's be careful. That would be, or that's my proposition. That would be our limit for now for scoping this exercise, because I know that at SDG level they went into really a lot of details, because it's basically a model for at the operational level to model the exchange of information between administrations and between systems. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, actually, I was making the scope even broader. It's not only the evidence part; it's the fact. Suppose that based on this model, we have a catalog that citizens can consult. Mm-hmm. And what if this catalog only contains a list of services that are provided in Belgium, but that person wants to apply for a job or even marry in another country? Should we somehow be able to list that service as well, services that are not on the local level, but really on the European level, and for which the SDGs is setting up a way of working.
So you mean also kind of not top down, but the impact of discussions happening at the European level and how we could consider them with extra public services or yeah.
Yeah, I think you started the webinar by saying we're doing this for the Belgium level, but on the other hand, if you look at it from the consumers, the Belgian level maybe isn't and from the SDG context, the Belgian level is maybe not that interesting anymore, or not enough. I don't know what the impact could be on the data model of that. That's what I mean. And should we look into that?
Yeah. I would propose that for the next webinar, we actually take the time to also look into it, and so that we can have proper discussions based on some analysis on our side as well, and also sharing the sources with you so that you can also have some time to prepare. But I think I understand that there is also quite some interest in looking into that, so let's do it.
Should check the core evidence vocabulary,
which was the basis indeed. Yes. For the models defined on yes. SDG side. Yep. For those who are not used to all those acronyms, I hope it's still bearable. The spatial information, I think, yeah, we discussed it. Let's continue indeed. Guidance related to the rules. To a doc or discrete set of steps. Indeed, it's from CPSV perspective, it's quite not high level, but it leaves quite some room for interpretation.
There's been a big discussion on that level. Should we take every step in the procedure as a discrete description, or should we take the document that describes the rules and the procedures as a whole? And it's left open on CPSV. Should we discuss it here or not? Or that's a discussion point.
Yeah, and let's dive into that maybe in the next webinar. Indeed,
perfect.
We have it as a placeholder today in the model, similarly to CPSVAP, and it also relates to our discussion, right?
Yes.
To what level of details do we want to go for describing the specific steps? So yes. Maybe something we'll tackle together with this aspect at a certain point. Yep. Okay. create records that have to be managed, protected, archived. Indeed, and yeah, in my understanding, this is normally covered by the dataset that we didn't use in the example, correct? But normally the record could be captured under the dataset or related to the dataset. The question is, indeed, what do we need to capture exactly about the records? I don't know who typed this one.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Yeah, so I don't know if it's in the right place here, or as you say, it's implicit in the data set aspect. But what I was thinking is that in many legal stipulations, it is also stipulated exactly what documents should be created, how they should be maintained, and that this actually also describes much about the services that are provided by a particular service provider. I'm thinking, for example, of the patrimonial documentation. They keep registers, and actually the registers that they keep, that pretty much describes the service that they provide. So I thought I'd add it, but as you say, it might be connected.
I think the use case behind and related to your archiving experience is very interesting, and so let's look into that. And I see also that the next comment is actually also related to DKDP, which is the model that defines the data set that we've seen in the model. So yeah, probably something we will look together, and maybe for the next webinar we can make an example out of that, or at least in our next proposition. I see also someone who put a post about GeoDKDP. To give also time to go through the next example about public organization, I'm going a bit faster, but I think, and the definition of status or life cycle that we discussed during the example. Okay, good. Let's dive back or go back to the slides and the public organization model. Thanks for the different elements and comments. Quickly going through the use cases that we discussed last time for the public organization side. It was also about harvesting information about public organization, also linking organizations and their structures into something coherent that would help users to identify the right units, identifying the changes, the evolution. That's actually the next one, the evolution of those units through time. And simply the last one is about how to share basic information about public organizations in a harmonized way publicly. I propose to directly dive into the model. We'll go back to this picture afterwards, but that's our initial proposition. But I propose to directly go to the example to make it clear. This example is of course illustrative. No worry, we are not pushing for any 7th reform of the state. And in this example, following an election, there has been an interinstitutional agreement. And according to this agreement, some competences have to be merged into one organization. It could have been the opposite. And will be managed by, so instead of several entities managing under regional, provincial, municipal law, it will be done, organizations, it will be done at the federal level. And this is actually an event that implements the agreement and that results into some changes for the organization. So, for example, a new organization will be created with a new name, a new description, and the previous organization existing will become sub-organizations of the new one. Then it will also mean that this new organization will need some contact information, and also some information about the open hours at which citizens and businesses can reach it. It will need to have probably an interface online, such as a website, have specific addresses. Then the mission, the purpose of the new organization will need to be stated together with a logo. And finally, yeah, I see that the image is, sorry, the text is partially cut, but there will be also some restructuring between the units, the agents that have some roles within the organization, and we'll need to define what is the jurisdiction, the special coverage of this administration from a competent authority point of view. And so directly diving into how this fits within the model, the interinstitutional agreement is actually the formal framework that we have as starting point for this this example, and it basically gives the mandate for the changes or for the organization to exist. Why do we talk about formal framework and not legal resource? Because if you remember in the previous model, we talked about legal resource, simply because we consider here that it must be a bit broader. Legal resource, it's always with the term legal, while formal framework can be outside of the law. It can be some agreements made that actually help to agree on the creation of a public organization. But of course, it includes also the legal aspect. And for now, it includes an identifier to the decision or to the text and a name. Then this formal framework is implemented by an event. Here, an event that is changing the organizations around. And so the change event here has a small description and a started time. And it's related directly to the public organizations impacted by this change event, which here are, for example, the Brussels and Walloon public organizations with certain competencies, so related in their description, that would result in a new public organization at federal level. So the relationships between the different organizations are simply that the previous organizations become sub-organization of the new one.
Mm-hmm.
Then this new organization, as mentioned, will have an address, will have contact points that can be email, telephones, with specific hours, opening hours defined. And this public organization has also a home page, which is considered from a modeling perspective as a document. The format of the document here is HTML, but still it can be a document. Finally, the public organization has also a new logo, which is an image, and the purpose is defined as part of a generic concept class. If there's anything clear, just let me know in the chat. When it comes also to the specific structure of the new organization, it can have one or more organizational units with their specific identifiers, descriptions, and time at which this organizational unit was updated, the data about this unit. This is actually coming from the webinar, the first webinar we had, where some people asked really for the updated data date. And then this public organization is has a, let's say, a mandate or covers a certain territory, which is here identified using also a European code that is maintained directly by the European Publications Office. And this administrative territorial unit can be also identified through geo-coordinates using this class geometry, which lists, in this case, all coordinates that help to put on, for example, with a vector on a map, the spatial coverage. First, a question for all of you. In this example, we don't really capture for now the agents, the people that have some roles in the organizations. Is it something needed?
It's something we capture in any case, capacities that are in place within a certain organization and the people that fill in that capacity in a certain function, so a certain role, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about public roles, who is the leading officer of a certain public organization, or who is a DPO, for example.
So you would have.
There is a use case for it. There is a use case for that type of information. I guess it is.
Yeah. So you would include an agent class and also the specific roles this agent has within the public organization.
Yes. Not starting from the viewpoint of it's a person who we're describing, but it's an organization that has certain roles, capacities that can be that must be filled in by law. You need to have a DPO, you need to have a leading officer, you need to have a spokesmanship for some sorts. And then further on, what are the contact points of that capacity? And if applicable, what's the name of the person filling in that capacity? Yes.
Mm-hmm. So for you, it's really about, you would model it using capacity then as the specific concepts for capturing that.
Yes, yes. That's
Any
how I
reactions?
do it.
Sorry. Any reactions on this? Do the others agree on adding this capacity as a placeholder for capturing such information? See, Olivier.
We don't want to describe all the people present in an organization, just to be sure.
Yeah. And in any case, it can be, if it's a placeholder, you decide to what level of details you go.
Of course, yes.
Okay, good. Then we will add this. What kind of geographical information do we need? At this stage, in this example, we have the address, but only one address. We could describe other ones, but then related to the previous discussion we had, how to capture the purpose of the address. That's something we'll need maybe to discuss a bit. Then here we have also, as you see, a code for the area, the administrative territorial unit. And also we can capture the coordinates with the geometry. Do we miss something? Yeah, Bernard?
Just to clarify, what's the relationship between public organization and administrative territorial units? Is it like the administrative territorial units are subdivisions of public organizations, just like organizational units could be also? Or is it something that describes the range of the public organization, the spatial range of the public organization as a whole?
In this case, it's more the spatial range, but I think your question is still valid in the sense that even if it's spatial range, Is it the legal spatial range, or is it something else that can be discussed on how to define this spatial range? And related to your other point, what about sub-organizations? So we could combine this with a self-relationship of public organization, where a public organization can have sub-organizations, as we have seen. Let me go here. And each of them can have a spatial coverage, a spatial range.
Or not, because
not, of course. Yeah. And maybe that's something we could define, whether there should be at least one or not. I don't know. That's up to us to decide. And but on your point then, how should we define spatial range in this case? Should we simply leave it open and keep it very generic, or should we also include a legal reference to it?
I'll leave the spatial experts talk, but if you want my opinion, it all ends up to coordinates or sets of coordinates that define a perimeter, but we can simplify it by providing, for example, administrative codes. We know that, for example, each municipality has an administrative codes, and it can be easier to use this as a proxy to a spatial range.
Yep. That's
also codes, but
sorry, I was talking on Stefan.
I wouldn't use postcodes though, but I'm no expert in this.
No, postal codes, no. That's well, this is how CPOV models things. I think we should try to agree. Yes, for now, at this point, yes.
That's open for yeah, Bert.
Yes. Well, I know that the administration of finances, who is responsible for the administrative units, and they have identified a unique ID for each administrative unit. So I think the proposition of Bernard is very good, so that we only include the ID, the official ID. And with that ID, you can make the link to the official source, and the official source will provide all the extra information that you need, like geometry and other data.
Yep. And do you know already, or it can be also done through GitHub later on, but if you know already some sources that we can use to update this model with the specific identifiers that you mentioned, you can already share it, so that otherwise we can do it through GitHub later on.
Yeah, okay. I will maybe share the documentation about the data specifications from the cadastre that were only recently created. So yeah, I will share those.
Thanks, Bert. Any other comments on this, or do we move forward? Or are there other pieces of information you would like to see from a spatial point of view? No. Okay, good. Then directly diving, it goes faster because this model so far is has less elements. It's more straightforward, but we dive right after into this similar exercise for this. So if we need to add anything, we can dive into that right after. So what didn't we cover as part of the example is basically the identifier itself, which is a specific class for identifying the organization and who issued this identifier, so the name of the authority that issued this identifier, etc., so that you can also keep track of why is this organization existing. Similarly to the public service model, we have a concept class that we used in the example for the purpose definition, but it can also be used for any classification defined. We discussed the change event, but actually there is also the foundation event, which is a specific type of change event. If we need to capture specific information about the foundation events that are different from the change events, feel free to think about that, and we can discuss it right after. Here, and that's something important, within a public organization is also considered more generally as an organization, which sounds logical. Public organizations, you had the public part, which makes it a specific type of organization. And something we started discussing was what are the roles of agents within more generally organizations. And so therefore, what are the roles of agents within public organization? But let's maybe discuss further about how do we see this differently from the capability or capacity and that Thomas, you described right before. Yeah, those are the main elements. And so I propose we go back to Mural, if you still have the link. Or if it's still open on your end. And on the right side of the screen, you can also see in the outline, you can click to the use cases and also to the model. And similarly to what we did right before, let's think 2 minutes about missing elements, missing information in the model, and discuss it afterwards. What I didn't mention also is that if you think elements are transversal and not related to any specific use case, you can include them in the last box. I don't see a lot of activity. Is it too abstract at the moment? Or simply not enough time to go through it?
For me, it's okay as is, so I don't have any objects.
Are there specific parts of the model we should discuss further? Besides the capacity part, maybe?
Well, I think that's covered within the agent part on the right. So. But we could discuss it if necessary. And then just the location part, the address part in regards to the public service. It's for the next webinar, I think.
Yeah, diving into how do we define the specific addresses, and maybe I think in Flanders you use the site to distinguish the different addresses.
The what?
A site.
Yes.
As IT.
Yeah.
A specific location.
Yes. Didn't understand it. Sorry.
I see some elements. So making a link between the contact point and the purpose. Why should we contact that person? Or so okay. And probably this is also relevant for the address, as we said earlier. What is the purpose of this address? But I think both are related.
Yes, it's the same thing. It's organizations with a lot of buildings, and if you don't specify why a particular address is or contact point in general is can be used for, it's not really interesting information, I think.
Yeah. It's all a question about how lean do we want this public organization part to be, or do we intertwine it within the public service context? And where do we put that information?
Yeah, of course. So capture useful information, but also making it maintainable in time. That's also something we should consider, right? But okay, let's dive into that. We'll also see how we could do that and come with propositions for the next webinar.
But you could say the same thing about the cost of a service. And I didn't say it at that point, but if you talk about maintainability, and there's a lot to say about a lot of concepts, of course.
That's correct. Yeah.
I wonder if that's something because at one point we might come up with a technique or that it becomes really easy to update that information. Now we know how hard it is, but you have to take into account that it might become really easy to update that keep that information up to date, and maybe that's therefore you should have it. That might be a reason to have it in the model, but optional. It's a difficult balance.
Yeah, but let's analyze what we can do and take some decisions also in the next webinar progressively. The next about disambiguating the sub-organization versus organizational unit concepts. It's true that right now, and I went quite fast through the example, it might be unclear what's the limit. And maybe that's something we need to discuss further. At this stage, we'll also propose some definitions next to each concept we discussed today on GitHub, so that you can review it properly, take the time to position yourself compared to the definitions proposed. I don't know if there are any reactions related to this one in particular right now. Okay, then we'll do it like this. We'll come back to it. So I understand this is about how services and events are related to public organization. Is that correct? Bert, was it you?
Hello. No, that's from me. If you're talking about proactive services, it's mainly related to the services and events, in my view.
Yep.
It's, well, it's always an organization that will provide it and make sure that it's proactive, but I do not see why this should be a use case of organization and not of services.
Yeah, indeed. It's connected, but probably it's more use case for service than organization in general. Yeah, that's a valid point. And yeah, and then your comment is more related to this use case, but for the public service model. I understand.
I think the context of this one was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Veronique who puts this, who said something about this use case, is when new organizations come into life from new law that is being voted on a regional or local level. This could be a use case to define new public organizations starting from harvesting legislation. And I think it's from that context that this one came into existence. But again, I follow Renilde for a part. And it's not a use case for the model as such, but it can be a functionality to automate actions from new public law to create new public organizations in a registered domain.
Yeah, and so from that, yeah, so we have two things: the proactive services and what you described, which is different from what you described right now. To my, which is a specific case of a proactive service, which would be creating the organizations themselves from the law. Yeah. Okay, but then let's disambiguate this as well for the next one, and we'll look in if there are specific elements we need to consider for those.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I put capacity, but that's indeed about the agent part as well that we just covered. No worries about public organization as well. We'll give you also extra time to review it in the coming weeks. So let me go back also to the slides. Voilà. And let's wrap up for today, I propose. I know 3 hours of webinars is always quite intense. But so in the coming weeks, we'll share different pieces of information on GitHub. So what you will be able to find over there are basically the webinar reports, some analysis we used as basis for defining the models, for looking at the different sources you share with us, etc. You will also find our propositions, which basically at the start will be the models we have seen in terms of visual representations. So the class diagram over here. And then also some, also some tables with the definitions of the terms so that we can start diving into some details from a semantic point of view. And what you will also find, of course, on GitHub, for those that are not familiar with it, is an issue tracker. So let me show you. So on this link, and you may want to save it in your somewhere on your laptops or in your browser, you can find on the code side the different folders with information. So we will add over there the webinar reports, etc., the models, and then you can also find the issue tracker, the second tab on the top ribbon, where you can follow up on existing issues that have been opened. But you can also create new issues. That's the green button on the top right. And you can also watch the activities over there by registering over here. That's useful when you want to follow some certain threads. And our advice is when you create a new issue is that, let me show you, that in the title you indicate the specific terms that you are describing, for which you would like to discuss, or where you have specific propositions, such as, for example, the class and the specific concepts like the attribute. And then you can describe it further. In your description, try also to be solution-oriented, so that we don't all come up with problems, but we also come with propositions, how to improve this model, and not only to point to this is missing. And then you can also, every time you create a new issue, indicate some labels on the right side. And here, the different labels, you will find public organization and public services. Please pick it every time you create a new issue, so that it's easier for us also to classify and categorize, okay, what is it referring to, in which model would you like to see that? Or GitHub. That's what I just explained with the labels, the title, and the idea of using GitHub is simply to have a basis for analysis and contributions in general to discuss during webinars. How to watch GitHub issues and the timelines. We are the 12th of July. The next webinar is in a month, by the 12th of August. You can already register from here. I don't know, I will copy the link in the chat in a second. If you haven't done it already, book the timing already in your agenda if not done yet either. And before that, we will share with you the main findings of this webinar together with the webinar report. The first webinar hasn't been shared yet, but it will in the coming days. What is also interesting is if you think about other examples of use cases that you would like us to look at. We discussed the archiving, to a certain extent, the SDG use cases. Please feel free to come back to us via email, probably it's the best. And yeah, of course, for the next webinar, it will be really great to have your inputs on GitHub. So please take some time once we share it with you. You will have at least 1 week or 2 to go through it and share your comments via GitHub. And then we can dive in into the different discussion points during the next webinar. Yeah, I understand, Thomas. It's summertime, so
Yes.
different people will be away. I will be taking some holidays afterwards. And of course, last point is for specific aspects. I think it's important that you involve domain experts. Today, for example, we said we would need a lawyer for that, or we would need some people from the spatial field. It's all fine, but it takes time actually to involve them. So please also consider that it's quite important. And as last time, you can find in the slides, we'll share them with you, the email addresses and the link to GitHub, where you can find us. The link to GitHub is the one I just put in the chat. Yeah. that's it for today. I don't know if there are any open points.
No.
Good. Then I propose to conclude here. Thanks a lot.
Goodbye, everyone. I have to go to another meeting now. Bye.
Have a nice day. Bye.
We'll be in touch. Talk to you.
Bye bye.